Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another nice review for you from the brand Squale, or Squale, before everybody jumps into the comments section and gives me essentially the equivalent of an Italian accent class. Just so you guys know, if you don't have an accent and you're not speaking another language, you would read it as squall. Kind of like BMW is BMW internationally and not BMW like it is in Germany. So just some food for thought, YouTube police. So with that said, Squale was established back in 1950. They're Swiss-made, and basically you can consider them kind of a heritage micro brand. They really focus on high-quality retro and vintage-inspired timepieces that really fit in between that kind of upper entry-level to mid-tier range, at least for Swiss watches anyway. Now, this type of watch, of course, is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics in design language when you're looking for a dive watch. Of course, you're going to want something that's water resistant, typically for some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time, bezel, and a diver's extension. It's always nice if on bracelet. Now, this particular model is the 50 Atmos Militare Opaco, which essentially is part of the 1521 line, and it is really based on the vintage Blancpain 50 Fathoms 3H Bund military issue diver. More specifically, the even more rare civilian variation to the original, which Squale actually produced, at least the original Squale produced back in the day for Blancpain and many other brands. They kind of this case shape is very popular, has been used over and over, and even Blancpain back in the day actually used an ETA 2873 in their watch. So just to kind of lift that veil. I know many of you kind of see them as, of course, hot horology these days. But during those humble beginnings, hey, Squale made the cases and ETA made their movements. And they were able to come out with some pretty iconic timepieces. So why not, as kind of the namesake of the original case maker, of a family-owned business that's still family-owned, not the Van Buren family, but still, kind of a one-to-one. It's not like it went dead for years and then just some random person bought it. It was something that was kind of entrusted over time and kind of rebrought and reinvigorated for today's market. Now, some of the changes for this model is, of course, you do have the full baton indices on the dial and the no date. And it has this nice revised minimalist branding, as you can see, Squale Militare or Squale Militare. And then you just have automatic 500 meters. So you don't get the double, triple, quadruple branding that some of you might have kind of complained about and ached and groaned about in the past. So, wow, I've been talking for a really long time, guys. Somebody, you guys got to warn me about these things. So with all that said, why don't I zoom out and we can take a closer look. All right, guys, as you can see, whoa, what is that? Is this a Squale here? No? Yeah. Okay. Just thought I'd add that. It's just little fun, guys. Just throw that out there. This thing is awesome. I love this watch, guys. I love the revisions that they made. Again, you guys actually, I didn't mention this. These retail for $8.59, and you can get them at Noman Watches. And man, this is just absolutely excellent as far as the aesthetic goes. They really nailed it. It's super clean. It does have the case side branding, which I honestly don't mind, especially considering the actual lineage of Squale is that they're really well known for making cases. I think that's, if anybody can write the name on the side of a case, it would be one that was really famous for making watch cases. So I mean, call me crazy, but I don't mind that. I think it kind of makes sense. I know I typically wear gloves in these, but honestly, with the matte finishing and the rubber strap, it just kind of felt like a little bit of overkill. Although now I've been mucking up the highly polished case back. Now, as far as the dimensions on this go, it's 41 millimeters in diameter. Honestly, it's barely 41. If you measure it from here to here, you see there's a flat point and a round point here. You measure it from there, it's just a hair over 40 millimeters. This bezel is a hair under 42, so it's more like 40.7 or something like that. So basically, that's considered a 41 because it's a little bit bigger than a 40 but smaller than a 42. As far as the thickness goes, actually pretty impressive, guys. This thing is only 12.7 millimeters thick, and it's 500 meters of water resistance. That's pretty nice. And they do a really nice job of really compartmentalizing the heft on this case. And the nice thing is this is actually a really old school case, so they designed it right from the get-go. They maybe weren't trying to do a lot of the tricks that you'll see other brands do. In this day and age, they were just kind of doing what they thought was good. So good on them. It's kind of like when you see these beautifully sculpted sports cars from the past before they had wind tunnels. They were just kind of going on a hunch on what they thought would work well, and somehow they ended up coming out with something beautiful. And I think this case is absolutely immaculate. You can't argue with that. You can argue with who owns Squale now, this and that, and all that stuff. One thing you can't argue with is this design. There's a reason why this was hugely popular during an era that is now hugely popular now. This vintage of aesthetics is hugely popular now, and there's a huge resurgence for it in the market. And during that era, this was a really hugely popular design. So it's obviously good, gorgeous, and beautiful. Now, of course, everything is matte blasted, but as the light hits, you can actually see these really nice bevels and chamfers there. Of course, there's not going to be any crazy transitionals or anything like that, but it's nice to look at it, and you can see the way the highlights hit it. There are beautiful bevels that are there underneath the matte finish, so really nice from that standpoint. Now the crown is really nicely tucked in there, right near 4 o'clock. Basically, this is kind of their idea of, instead of having big old crown guards on the side, if they just tucked it into the case shape there, then it worked. And honestly, it does a great job. Almost too good of a job, because when you're unscrewing it, you don't have much to grab on. You really are just rolling your finger here on the bottom because you're getting the full grip there, but nothing from kind of the top really or the side. It works well enough for me. I've, kind of medium-sized hands, and I don't mind it. The nice thing is that this keeps excellent time, because it does have an ETA 2824, and this thing, I don't know if they just regulate them very well out of the box or they just get very lucky. It seems like people do typically report really great timekeeping from these ETA movements that they use within squalls. Now, one of the really great things, of course, is this bezel action, which is very old school. It's only 60 clicks, guys, and it's nothing crazy, but man, does it work. It's tactile. You get enough grip on it. Look at all this surface area to grab. It's a captive bezel, so it's screwed in. You're not going to pop it off if it hits something. Lines right up. There is some play, guys. It's a 60-minute bezel, all right, 60 clicks. So between this click and this click, the nice thing is when you pull back on it, it lines up perfectly. So pull back on it, everything lines up perfectly. Look at it. So perfectly. So that's something that, believe it or not every dive watch does. So really impressed from that standpoint. Yeah, a little bit of, you can rock it, but it's not like there's a lot of play up and down or anything like that. It's not, there's not a lot of give. It's one of those things that it's not due to a lack of tolerance. It's just the design, and being a 60-click bezel that's not using anything crazy like ball bearings. That's generally how it's going to be able to be used, and it does a good job. Honestly, I felt much looser and much worse from watches that costed more, so you can't really get mad at that. Now, of course, the movement inside is, you can't see it, but it's there. ETA 2824-2. So there is going to be a ghost movement, ghost position, because there's no date. It's a no date, but man, it's, for me, it's worth it. Just the balance in the dial, and of course the overall military aesthetic with the bead blast finish and whatnot. I think it just ties in really, really well. It's matte, and then you do have, of course, this almost neon. It's really hard to describe. It almost looks like it's just glowing on its own, because it's so bright. It's like a highlighter orange, would probably be the best way to describe that minute hand. So it gives you that important information. It's fully indexed on this bezel, which is great. Which I do like a lot. Of course, the dial is matte black like it should be. It does have printed indices, you know, again, very balanced without the date. And then it uses Swiss Super Luminova. Honestly, it's not the craziest lume by any standard, but compared to pretty much every other Squale that I've ever seen, this one is definitely the strongest lume. And a lot of it just has to do with the surface area being more, because it's using full batons versus any types of small circles. So from that standpoint, it does the job. It's water resistant to 500 meters or 50 ATM or 50 atmospheres, 50 Atmos. So in case you were wondering why I got that name, 50 Atmos. 50 atmospheres, guys. 50 ATM. Now, the lugs are 20 millimeters. This is actually a Squale strap. This is their Tropic Type 2. And it's nicely signed here. It has great elasticity. You know, it's just, I shouldn't say elasticity. It's not stretchy, but it's, you can really bend it. It's very pliable. And you can see that it does have a bit of a taper. Thickness wise, it's thicker up here where you need that structure to keep it on your wrist, and then thinner down here where you're going to be having everything tucked and layering, right? Because there's not just one piece of rubber, you're going to have two, even three, because you got these cool, really well done keepers. I was very surprised. Also, this hardware actually comes fully polished. This was actually a little DIY, little tumble stone wash that I did to kind of knock some of the shine off so that it would go a little bit better with the blasted case. It's not a perfect match or anything like that, but I think it does the job, and of course, for me, better than just a super blingy polished strap. I'm sorry, a super polished buckle with a very matted dial. So this actually looks probably more like a patina. It ends up looking like, or just kind of a mild stone wash. But I think it looks great. You guys, if some of you are interested, there you go. You can see that the rocks that I use, these little stones, weren't super small. It wasn't like sand, so there are still portions where you can still see kind of that were protected with some polish sticking out. I think it actually looks really cool. I think it's a good look. One thing I actually do want to mention also, because I really haven't reviewed too many Squales on the channel, is the packaging. I was really impressed. So you got the little shark, boom. You know, normally that's on the dial, so not on the dial. Sorry to those of you who miss it. Oh, no one watches. Great. And then this actually, you can use this to figure out the size, right, of your lugs. So you go, oh, look, oh, cool, 20 millimeter lugs. Perfect. So that's kind of useful. But one thing that I really liked was the execution of their little watch wallet, guys. This thing is nice. It's like blue leather. It's not it's not too much, you know, it does enough. I dig it. You know, you get the little manual, which I don't need to read for 2824. You get the little warranty card, because they are authorized dealers. And then the hang tag. Oh, and here's the strap that it comes on, which is nice. Obviously, I don't think it goes great on my skin tone, but you can see the buckle it came with. Unfortunately, it's a little bit wider. It's an 18 millimeter taper on this one, so it goes 20 to 18, so it's a little bit wider, so I couldn't transfer it over, but that one is perfectly bead blasted to match. It's nice. And then of course this tone here actually does play really well with the orange seconds hand, so that's nice. But you know, as far as travel wear goes, this thing this is actually pretty usable. I like how tidy it is and how it just kind of comes together. Doesn't have a lot of extra flaps. It's nice. It's pretty supple to the touch. So yeah, I did want to share that with you guys really quick, just because I was genuinely impressed by it. And then yeah, this is pretty cool too. Pretty useful. You don't have to bust out the calipers every time. But with that said, let's actually get this on wrist for some wrist shots so you guys can see how this thing rides. All right, guys, as you can see on my 700 wrist, this thing wears really well. I love the aesthetic with the Tropic strap. It just ties into kind of that 70s look, 60s and 70s look, I should say. But man, it's just a handsome piece. And then, of course, the military aesthetic with the black strap, for me, it just ties in really well. Of course, I did something like 9 years and 10 months in the United States Marine Corps, so I do enjoy a nice kind of military themed watch. And this one is cool. This is one I could have easily worn while I was active duty, just because it's very versatile. It's 500 meters water resistance, built to be tough. It has a finish that's going to wear really well, obviously, because it's not going to pick up too much as far as wear marks. And the ones that do, honestly, will add character. If you really want to add wear marks to it, get it in all polished, and then as that wears, it will look really, really great, honestly. So, but from this standpoint, the nice thing is obviously it's non-reflective, and then of course the rehaut there is also matted, which is great. So no amount of patina is going to be able to get that to match with the outside of your watch if you have a polished one that you get all scuffed up and beat up with your own little stories and scars there. So for me, that's nice out of the box. Very tactical look to it. Even up close, you can see with a little bit of lens distortion, it looks a little bit large, but as you can see, it just rides the wrist really well. Of course, that crown is super unobtrusive. I wear my watches on my right wrist because I write with my left hand, but you guys get the picture. Obviously, that crown is tucked out of the way, so it'll be fine for you guys who put it kind of standard issue on your left wrist. But this thing wears really well, guys. I'm really happy, and then obviously it actuates really well on the wrist when it comes to using the bezel, so that's also very nice. So as expected, this thing wears well. A lot of it has to do with the case. Look at the way the lugs turn down. They just wrap around the wrist really well. And then, of course, that little protrusion from the case back and these nice little undercuts, guys, really help give you some breathing space to really maneuver the watch. And if you don't have that, a lot of times what you can do is you can, of course, throw it on a NATO or something like that. You'll give yourself a little bit of extra space, kind of adding some artificial space between you and the case back. But even here, as it's really wrapped tightly against my wrist, it wears absolutely fantastic. So why don't we actually jump into some low light and Lume shots. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you guys can see, the Lume is very nicely done. Nothing crazy though. I mean, it does the job as a vintage inspired diver. Of course, the Lume pip could probably be a little bit brighter. It's probably a little bit of that is the camera actually kind of compensating for how bright the hands are. It's making some of the other stuff a little bit darker. But to my eye, when I look at it, it looks great. One of the things I also like to do during these Lume shots is actually work in some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in direct sunlight out in the middle of the field or something like that, which is pretty much what my bright studio lights are going to kind of do the best job of simulating. Another thing though, of course, typically it works better if you have, some type of sunray dial or, different type of brushing and polishing to kind of look at the way the finishes are. Here, you're really just kind of seeing all of the assimilations of black at different lighting you're going to get. And the nice thing is, yes, it's going to be quite pitch black and a negative space at some moments, but then there are actually some nice textures you can get. And because of that bezel being matte aluminum insert, it actually does play really well with the matte black dial. And then of course, all the texturing that goes into this beautifully done rubber Tropic style strap. Really beautiful from that standpoint as well. So let's actually get into some closing thoughts. Now, guys, on the wrist, this thing has absolutely classic proportions, and classic proportions aren't always just small. I mean, for me, this is a full-size diver. Although it's only 41, it's hardly undersized and definitely not oversized. It's a beautifully proportioned dive watch, and the nice thing is it's actually from a pretty recognizable trendy brand. Squale, whatever you want to call them, they're pretty well known, whether it's the forums or the YouTube community or even just kind of hipsters, these days know a little bit about Squale. It's a trendy brand with rich heritage, and a lot of that has to do with how well they've been embraced. Obviously, this aesthetic came back into style, that 60s, 70s dive watch aesthetic, and since considering that's back in style, and this was one of the most stylish cases that you could find within that era, then yeah, it makes sense that this watch should be popularized now with vintage aesthetics coming back. It shouldn't be any other way. For me, what makes this watch really special and kind of separates it even more and kind of puts it in another tier is it has that great mil-spec aesthetic. In the same vein as issued watches like the Rolex Mil-Sub or the Omega Big Triangle Seamaster 300. And then it has actually a legitimate tie to, of course, the Blancpain Bund 3H watches, which were military issue. And this particular variation of that does a nice job of kind of bringing that to the table, bringing those design elements back into the fold, which is great. It's not really purely a 50 Fathoms homage. It's a very particular reference that this is kind of keying into, and it's a really cool kind of lesser known reference, especially when you consider it's even lesser known reference of the civilian variation of the 3H Budweiser watches. So it's really cool and very interesting. As far as model variants go, there are multiple color options as far as dial and bezel that are out there. Definitely check for current availability. They're actually often coming out with new releases and kind of special runs that they do depending on the dealer. Of course, I got this from Norman Watches, so a lot of cool stuff from their side. But as far as the kind of main differences go, you can get it, of course, in an all polished case, an all matte blasted case like this one, or even an all blacked out PVD case, which I think is great. Now, as far as comparable models go, I'd say within this space, it really sets itself apart in the fact that it's relatively slim for a 500 meter water resistant watch, but also that it's vintage inspired and deep diving. It has 500 meters of water resistance. There's other watches that are out there, like let's say some of the Oris Big Crown reissues that are 100 meters of water resistance, right? They're not really that deep diving. A lot of the Tudor stuff, reissues 200 meters of water resistance. So there are other brands that are reissuing kind of these old vintage style watches. But the nice thing I think is that Squale here, they're reissued a real icon, right? They're not just looking like Boris, just looking at some kind of random inspiration from a couple of watches they sold back in the day that were nowhere near as popular then as this watch was back then, or at least different variations of this watch under different brands and badges. So I think that's where it really is doing something different, and it's really standing out in the fact that it has the form factor and the function. It's not something that just is meant to kind of reminisce on a particular period. It actually is reminiscing on a particular reference from that period, and one reference in particular that it actually does have a direct lineage and heritage connected to. So I think that's really awesome. I mean, bottom line for me, with the combination of the build quality, of course, the aesthetics and the history tying up, the whole package of this piece and for the brand, for me, this is the Squale model to own. And that's why I own it, and that's why it's been added to my collection. It's been a long time coming, honestly, and I'm really happy that they came out with this variation because I think it's killer and it fills a space that I think most people want to fill. A lot of people want that utilitarian tool watch, and it's funny because we've seen so many variations and homages of this particular watch case, and I feel like sometimes we're less critical of those brands, but then we're overcritical of a brand that does technically have some lineage and heritage that goes back to the original cases that were made in this fashion. So, with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do hit like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.